To summarize part 1 of Ahmad Shah Massoud's life before diving into part 2, he went to a French school in Afghanistan, his mom was extremely smart, and his dad was a colonel. Also, he beat up bullies in school. Massoud hated communism with a passion and found fellow militant Hekmatyar and Hig to be extremely radical and brutal. He led a successful guerrilla campaign against the Soviets and communist Afghan government. He allied with former DRA General Dostum and was offered to run the post-war government, but decided to let everyone else work it out for themselves in an acceptable political settlement. Got the summary from part 1? Great. Time to dive into what happened to Ahmad Shah Massoud after the end of the 1989 to 1992 Afghan Civil War, which, spoiler alert, is known as the First Afghan Civil War, so things aren't going to go well. So now that the communists have been defeated and everything is all sunshine and rainbows in Afghanistan, right? Wrong. In April of 1992, resistance leaders in Peshawar tried to negotiate a settlement. Massoud supported the Peshawar process of establishing a broad coalition government inclusive of all resistance parties. However, Hekmatyar sought to become the sole ruler of Afghanistan and claimed a coalition government would never work. Massoud had felt that since everyone had fought for Afghanistan, that therefore everyone should be able to peacefully hash it out in a negotiation and general election. However, Hekmatyar strongly disagreed and lobbed a grenade into the idea of a post-war peace. In recorded audio, Massoud reportedly told Hekmatyar that Kabul was ready to surrender and allow a transitional government to take power and invited him to join other resistance leaders. However, Hekmatyar wasn't having any of it and said that he was marching on Kabul and that no one could stop him at this point, so Massoud started giving up on peace on the idea with Hig. On April 24, 1992, the leaders in Peshawar agreed on and signed the Peshawar Accord, establishing the post-communist Islamic State of Afghanistan, which was considerably weak as it was made from scratch, but it was welcomed by the UN. Under the 1992 Peshawar Accord, the defense minister was given to be Massoud, while the prime ministership was given to Hekmatyar. Hekmatyar refused to sign, and with the exception of Hekmatyar's Hig, all of the other Peshawar resistance parties were unified in the peace process and power-sharing accord in April. Anyway, Hekmatyar was still angry and started marching on Kabul. He became so unreasonable that it got to the point where Osama bin Laden, yes, that bin Laden, who fiercely hated Massoud and fought with Hekmatyar against Massoud in the Soviet-Afghan War, told Hekmatyar to get his head out of his butt. However, Hekmatyar was determined to have everything under his control, and Hig initiated a massive bombardment campaign against Kabul, which kicked off the Second Afghan Civil War on April 28, 1992. The day that the new government replaced the communists. Hig's support mostly came from Pakistan, but also came from Iran. You see, Pakistan still viewed Hekmatyar as their best asset in Afghanistan and wanted him to control the country after he initiated the Second Civil War to become their access to Central Asia. Actually, the ISI had been preferring Hig's conquest of Kabul in 1990, but the US under George H.W. Bush's administration had pressured Pakistan to back off. But the ISA would continue to provide Hig with rockets for his 1992 assault. Iran, meanwhile, provided support to Hig when they were operating with Iranian-backed Hezb Wadat, which fought with Hig against Massoud and the new Afghan government. According to Human Rights Watch, numerous Iranian agents were assisting Wadat forces as Iran was attempting to maximize their military power and influence in the new government as the civil war raged. The offshore operation was launched in February 1993 by Massoud and government forces, which were supported by the Saudi-backed Wahhabist Ittihad-e-Islami group, which wanted to march on Kabul against Hig and the Hezb Wadat. Although the operation was successful by government forces, they ended up with an accord between Massoud and Hekmatyar, but the anti-government forces committed mass atrocities against the civilian population, as did some of the government and Wahhabists, which infuriated Massoud. Under the March Accord brokered by Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, Rabbani and Hekmatyar agreed to share power until elections could be held in late 1994. However, Hekmatyar's condition had been the resignation of Massoud as Minister of Defense. The parties agreed to a new peace accord in Jalalabad on May 20th, under which Massoud agreed to relinquish the post of Defense Minister in order to gain peace. Hekmatyar at first accepted this post as Prime Minister, but after attending only one cabinet meeting, he left Kabul and again began to bomb the city again, leaving more than 700 dead in bombing raids, street battles, and rocket attacks. Massoud returned to the position of Minister of Defense to defend the city against rocket attacks, and off to war once again we go. In August, Massoud reached out to Hekmatyar in an attempt to broaden the government and achieve peace once again, But by the end of 1993, Hekmatyar and former communist general and militia leader Abdul Rashid Dostum were involved in secret negotiations to stage a coup and overthrow the Rabbani administration and, of course, to attack Massoud. This was, of course, encouraged by Pakistan's ISI, Iran's intelligence service, and the Uzbek Karimov administration. In January of 1994, Hig, Dostum, Hezb-e-Wadat, and Jubish-e-Milli launched the Shura Hamagangi campaign against the forces of Massoud and the interim government. But by mid-1994, Hekmatyar and Dostum were on the defensive in Kabul against government forces led by Massoud. Although ceasefires were rare, when they occurred they were negotiated by Massoud to give the civilians a break from the conflict. Although Massoud started to gain the upper hand, a previously unknown group began taking provinces in central and southern Afghanistan throughout 1994, and that group would be the Taliban. By early 1995, Massoud initiated a nationwide political process with the goal of national consolidation and democratic elections. Massoud also invited the Taliban as an olive branch to join the peace process, wanting them to be a partner in providing stability to Afghanistan during this process. When he went to talk with several Taliban leaders, however, they declined any form of peace. When Massoud returned to Kabul unharmed, the Taliban leader who had received him as a guest paid for this with his life as he was killed off by other senior Taliban leaders for failing to assassinate Massoud when the opportunity presented itself. Also at this point, Pakistan ditched Hekmatyar in favor of the Taliban, so Hekmatyar began sweating like a high school kid who answered C 3 times in a row on a Scantron. At this point, all bets were off with Massoud. The Taliban began a 2-year-long siege of Kabul, which would resemble the Yugoslav wars, but would routinely be broken by Massoud's tactical victories against the group. Starting on March 12, 1995, Massoud's forces launched an offensive against the Taliban and were able to drive them out from the area surrounding Kabul, and retaking Chara Siab on March 19th, and led to the period of relative calm for a few months. The battle left hundreds of Taliban dead, and the force itself suffered its first defeat. However, while retreating, the Taliban, of course, shelled the capital of Kabul, and on March 16th, Rabbani stated once again that he would not resign because he felt he was still relevant at this point. Massoud and Rabbani, meanwhile, kept working on an internal Afghan peace process as Massoud continued to beat the Taliban in battle after battle. By February of 1996, all of Afghanistan's armed factions except for the Taliban had agreed to take part in the peace process and to set up a peace council to elect a new interim president. But by September 26th, the Taliban encircled Kabul again, and at this point Massoud decided to conduct a strategic retreat through a northern corridor to prevent pointless civilian casualties. The Taliban marched into Kabul on September 27, 1996, and established the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Massoud and his troops retreated to the northeast of Afghanistan and kicked off the Third Afghan Civil War by putting up armed resistance against the Taliban. The Northern Alliance was then assembled in late 1996 by Abdul Rashid Dostum, Ahmad Shah Massoud, and Karim Khalili against the Taliban. At this point, Massoud is said to have had a force of some 50,000 men supported by both aircraft and tanks. On October 5, 1996, the Taliban attacked Massoud's forces in the Salagan Pass, but suffered heavy losses. On October 1st, Massoud retook Jabal Sarij and Charikar. Bagram was taken a week later, and on October 15th to the 19th, Karabakh changed hands before being captured by Massoud and Dostum's forces. During the period of October 21st to the 30th, Massoud's forces stalled on the way to the capital to prevent the Taliban from continuing their marches. As the Taliban's brutal reign took over, hundreds of thousands of people fled to Northern Alliance territory as well as to Pakistan and Iran. Under Massoud's territory, people in Afghanistan had experienced the most freedom that they had ever had anywhere else in the country, mostly due to Massoud's education at a French school. People were able to go about their lives without being bothered by Massoud's democratic government, and women went to school. There were also at least 2 instances where Massoud personally intervened against acts of forced marriage. Massoud also created many advanced democratic institutions, and many people came to him personally when they had a dispute or problem and asked him to personally solve all of their issues. Massoud's soldiers also held around 1,200 Taliban prisoners in the Panjshir Valley alone, and 122 of them were foreigners who had come to Afghanistan to fight a jihad. In 1997, Massoud had his Afghan army equipped with newly acquired military uniforms and advanced after a few large offensives to the gates of Kabul. The alliance pushed forward with tanks, APCs, and heavy weapons into Bagram Air Base, which was the first major victory they had scored against the Taliban since they had lost Kabul in the previous civil war. But he halted an offensive onto the capital city to avoid civilian casualties due to the fact that Kabul had no stable government. Massoud would also provide military support and cooperate with Dostum as a lot throughout the civil war. In 1998, after the defeat of Dostum's faction in Mazar-e-Sharif, Ahmad Shah Massoud remained the only main leader of the United Front against Afghanistan and the only leader who was able to defend vast parts of his area against the Taliban all at once. During this time, commenters remarked that the only thing standing between the future Taliban massacres is Ahmad Shah Massoud. During his time from 1996 to 2001, Massoud faced roughly 45,000 Pakistani, Taliban, and al-Qaeda soldiers, and of those only 14,000 were Afghan Taliban, as there were believed to be 28,000 Pakistani nationals fighting in Afghanistan against Massoud's troops. Pakistan would also deploy the 50th Airborne Division and the Frontier Corps to provide logistical support to the Taliban campaigns against Massoud. Despite the large series of organized attack operations led by General Rana of Pakistan's army and their Taliban allies, they were not able to subdue the Panjshir Valley. Ahmad Shah Massoud, who had defeated the Soviets' 40th Army in his hometown before, successfully defended the Panjshir Valley once again and diverted further assaults led by Pakistan and the Taliban. Massoud had also been repeatedly offered a position of power by the Taliban to make him stop his resistance. Massoud would constantly decline, declaring the difference between their ideology and his own pro-democratic outlook on society to be insurmountable. Therefore, the Taliban and Northern Alliance would continue to fight out their civil war. Relations between the United States and Massoud were somewhat rocky during the Second Civil War. The Bill Clinton administration advocated for Massoud's surrender to the Taliban and would also convince Massoud to not take an opportunity against the Taliban in 1997 that would have allowed him to make crucial gains. Needless to say that Massoud wasn't a big fan of Clinton. On the other hand, the CIA cooperated with Massoud in trying to find bin Laden after the 1998 Kenya embassy bombing. Also, DIA analyst Julie Sears visited Massoud's territories in 1998 and reported that Massoud had conveyed warnings about strengthening ties between the Taliban and foreign terrorist groups like al-Qaeda. However, she would lose her job during the Clinton administration for going to Afghanistan, as his standing policy on Afghanistan was surrender. However, after George W. Bush won the 2000 presidential election, the U.S. began to support Massoud and the Northern Alliance in cooperating against terrorist groups. In early 2001, Massoud addressed the European Parliament in Belgium requesting international support for the Northern Alliance. He stated that the Taliban and al-Qaeda had introduced a very wrong perception of Islam and that without support from Pakistan and bin Laden, the Taliban would not be able to sustain their military campaign for even a year. Massoud also warned that his intelligence had gathered information about a large-scale attack on U.S. soil being imminent. On September 9, 2001, two suicide bombers posing as Belgian journalists detonated during an interview with Massoud, and although he survived the initial attack, Massoud died in a helicopter that was taking him to an Indian military field hospital in Tajikistan. In over 26 years, Massoud had survived dozens of other assassination attempts by the Soviet KGB, Afghan Communist Intelligence Services, Pakistani ISI, Hekmatyar, the Taliban, and al-Qaeda. For many days, the United Front denied the death of Massoud for fear of desperation among their population. In the end, however, the slogan, "Now we are all Massoud," became a unifying battle cry against the Taliban. Massoud is considered a national hero as he posthumously received many honors in Afghanistan before the Taliban takeover of the country in 2021. He was also honored by India and Tajikistan and is known as the Lion of Panjshir, as well as the Afghan who won the Cold War for his successes against the Soviets. In a 2001 morning ceremony in Moscow to honor the memory of Ahmad Shah Massoud, his one-time foe, Colonel Abdul Qadir, stated, "Though Massoud and I used to be enemies, I am sure he deserves great respect as an outstanding military leader and, first of all, as a patriot of his country." Ahmad Shah Massoud's son, Ahmad Massoud, was declared his successor in 2019, and after the Taliban takeover of the country following the fall of Kabul, he established the National Resistance Front to resist the Taliban in the Panjshir Valley in what is known as the Republican insurgency in Afghanistan. Ahmad Massoud would also make the same trip that his father did to request Western support against the Taliban. And that is the end of part 2 of the life of Ahmad Shah Massoud. Is there anything that I left out or should have talked more about? What other aspects of Afghanistan's history should I cover? Write in the comments, and thank you for watching.